Traveling changes a man you know.
Hello out there. This is Tyler Gooden sitting here with my good friend Zach Sutherland for another episode of the Traveling Podcast. We're here to tell you stories about traveling. And today we have a really special one. We have decided to bring you guys some insights into how to do what we have done. Zach and I both have two completely different approaches to living abroad, and maybe we can bring to you out there some insights in case you were thinking about doing something similar to what we've done. Zach, for example, is he's gone the route of being an English teacher abroad, which meant he had a very structured sort of plan and knew exactly what he was getting into, more or less, and what it would be like once he was there. Whereas I just grabbed a backpack and hopped on an airplane and sort of flew by the seat of my pants until I came to some sort of equilibrium. So I'm going to start it with a question for Zach. Zach, you started out as an English teacher. What does that look like for someone that is interested in getting started? What are the programs? What do you have to do to get certified? Or how does one go about being an English teacher in a foreign country?
There's several different ways you can do a TEFL certificate. You can get a CELTA, what's called a CELTA, which is the British one, which is a higher quality one. You can do these TEFL courses online, or what I did was I traveled all the way to St. Petersburg and got my TEFL there in a classroom with Russian students, which I think that's the best way to be in a classroom with students and with your teacher.
So your program that you went on to in St. Petersburg, it was a mixture of a bunch of different foreign students there to get certified as an English teacher, or it was mostly English native speakers that you were taking classes with?
So it was two other Americans who were also getting their TEFL certificate, and
Yeah.
that's teaching English as a foreign language.
Okay.
And the advantage to that was that there would be students that they gave these free lessons to. So Russian students would come in and they would
So you
take...
get to practice on the locals.
So you
I
got
see.
to practice on the locals. And that's just a great way to do it, I think, because in classroom experience is the best teaching experience.
So you have a practical sort of training experience. I have a friend. He runs the TEFL program in Prague. His name's Chris, and I've known him for ages, and I know that what they do is they basically sort of advertise out to people that are interested in living abroad. But a lot of people that want to do this, they start out just wanting to travel. It seems to be the most common denominator in people wanting to do it. Some people, I suppose, they always wanted to be an English teacher, but a lot of people just want to learn how to live abroad, and so they find these programs. You just went straight into the program. You paid for the program. You went over. I think they help you with accommodation. It's kind of got it's a little bit packaged. It's got some structure. You get a chance to meet people. You get a chance to meet people from different parts of at least English-speaking countries. You kind of come in together and you get real live practical experience teaching. You learn how to be an English teacher, English as a foreign language, actually in a foreign country.
Yeah, and they set me up with accommodation. I had a host family, which was important because I didn't speak any Russian.
Yeah.
And so my host family would help me get passport photos. Sergey would drive us anywhere. They would cook 3 meals a day for us. It was a wonderful experience.
That's amazing.
And that sort of was, talking about the bungee cord, that softened the initial drop.
And what Zach means by this bungee cord is the cultural bungee jump that you do when you travel. It was a great metaphor he mentioned in a previous podcast. When you go abroad, it's like you're tethered to a bungee cord and you're leaping down into this like exciting sort of crevasse of foreign experience, but you never quite hit it, and you're always, as long as you're tethered to who you are and where you're from, you can kind of bounce back until you get your equilibrium. And I think it's a wonderful way of describing the cultural leaps that we make when we travel. So in my experience, as a kind of fly by the seat of my pants kind of guy, I went over abroad and I did some English teaching as well, which we can get to later, but I didn't have a TEFL certificate. I never got certified. I just did what's called conversational classes. I don't know how easy it is now compared to when I was doing it, but I was able to get jobs just because I was a native English speaker, and they were so excited to have a native English speaker, and they would hire me under the table, and I would come in and do classes for these particular individual private clients. It certainly had its challenges, but that again, it comes back to our two different approaches, one being very structured and one being very wild, and both have their benefits and both have their negatives for sure. So if anybody out there is interested in traveling abroad and making a living, there's many ways to do it. You don't have to be an English teacher. Obviously, you can do many things. You can be a tour guide or work under the table in a bar, or if you have an online business that you've started before you go, then it's already in profit, then why not? But I would say the best way to do it, if you are not going on this sort of structured program, another way is just to be very highly specialized in something that allows you to travel. Like if you're a graphic designer or a video editor, or have some sort of a specific sort of skill set that you can take abroad, then that makes it very plausible to do. I knew people that worked in hostels, but they never quite made enough money to actually do much other than live in the hostel. So let's get to the next topic in our living abroad in two different ways. Did you find it problematic at all to get by and feel comfortable without speaking the native language? Because you're thrown into a completely foreign environment and nobody's like speaking your language. You're not speaking theirs. Maybe it's in a different alphabet. You got to get around and you're thrown into it. Now, this is one thing that I know people might have hesitations about when they are thinking about traveling. They're like, well, I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to live in a place where they're not speaking my language. Did you have those problems? If so, how and why? And if not, why not?
Right from the train station, I arrived and my host family, Sergey, was there with a sign that had my name on it, and took me to their house, and then they kind of showed me around, and then their son, Yaroslav, he was a teenager. He also helped with just any day-to-day needs. So I didn't really have to speak Russian that first month. I could rely on them, but they also offered free language lessons, Russian language lessons, where I got my TEFL certificate. So at the same time that I was learning how to teach English, I was also learning Russian.
But you were in an environment where you didn't have to worry about surviving on your own. You could rely on this host family to do it.
Yeah, I mean, they just the day-to-day stuff as far as getting around, knowing where to go. Yeah. If I ever wanted to eat McDonald's, they could just kind of tell me where to go to do certain things. I was also there with another American
in the house that lived
in the house.
Oh,
yeah,
that must be such a buffer for homesickness or like feeling like a foreigner, feeling like an alien in a new world, just in having another person there that you can hang out with.
I think he was kind of looking for a bride. Hey, that's fine. You want to go over there and look for a Russian bride? I think
they find those brides.
There's a thing
before they go, and then they get over there and they get scanned, and they come back and say, "I'll never go there again."
Well, I feel like that's another story. But.
I think, yeah, absolutely. But I think that it's interesting. I think that what you're tapping into really does get to the heart of my question, which is it's not really just about the language. It's about either you're bringing something familiar with you, you're traveling with somebody you know, or you're going into an environment where they're at least supporting the knowledge that you don't know anything about where you're at. So in terms of a practical sense, and people out there that are listening that might be thinking about doing this themselves, how do you go from wanting to be there to having a host family? Does the teaching program set that up with you? How did you find the host family?
So I went through the Benedict school, but it was the Via Lingua program. Okay. And the Via Lingua program, I just looked up TEFL certification programs online, came up with Via Lingua, and I focused in on Via Lingua because there was a school in St. Petersburg, Russia, and I had already had that experience in Finland where I studied abroad in Finland for 4 months, and I wanted to be in Russia. And I kind of did some research on St. Petersburg. I thought that's a beautiful city. I'll go there. Right. And it's nearby Finland, so I could also use my ex-girlfriend. she could kind of help me. She was initially the one who told me a little bit about Russian culture. And so I kind of got interested about Russia kind of through her. But back to your question, I found the program, the Via Lingua program. They set me up with like a visa. I give them all this information that you need for your
Right.
visa.
They get you the paperwork.
Yeah, they get the paperwork. Then they told me, you will be staying with a host family.
They set up the host family. These host families probably are included in the program. They probably, I would imagine, they get some kind of a payment, something like that, to host foreigners. And so it's almost like an exchange student in high school or something. It's a triangulated situation where you have the host family, then you have the person that wants to travel, and then you have the school putting it together. Is that correct? So the school was part of the school program.
Right, and also in addition to that, the school, the Benedict School, hired me directly after I graduated from the program.
Got it. I noticed that about English teachers when I was living in Prague. A lot of the ones that would come and get the TEFL certificate, they were immediately off and working either in Prague or somewhere else. And that was exciting to me, which was completely different than my approach. It was so interesting to watch these guys come over. I would meet them. They would be fresh off the boat, didn't know anything about living abroad or Czech Republic or anything. And then I would see them again 3 months later, and I'd be like, what are you doing? They'd be like, I'm going to Saudi Arabia, or I'm going to Switzerland. Or, they had been changed people, and also they were set up to do the thing that they came over to do, unless they were coming over to find a Russian bride. And if that was their excuse, then maybe they were having a harder time. But if they were actually going there to be an English teacher and they took it seriously, I noticed that the ones that really did take it seriously and got really good at it, and they are actually intentionally wanting to be an English teacher, they went on to do great things and travel around the world and live in like a dozen countries, So my approach was a little bit different in terms of like language barriers and in discomforts and not knowing where in the hell I am and what the hell people are saying. I just went and I found myself trying to survive and then trying to figure out what I was going to do next and how I was going to do it. And I ended up becoming really resourceful as a result. I was originally thinking about doing the JET program, which the JET program is a teaching program to go to Japan. And I looked into it and I got really close to doing it. And I can't remember why I didn't do it. I think I had that adventurous spirit already, sort of like the spark had been lit, and I just was like, no, sounds too complicated, sounds like too much work, sounds like too much under the umbrella of somebody else. I'm just gonna go and do my thing. So I just hopped on the plane, and next thing I know, I was in Europe. But what I found with language barriers is that abroad it's ubiquitous English, like it's everywhere. You're going to have some places that you're not going to be able to speak English in. I got trapped in Poland, which is an amazing, incredible, crazy story for another time, where I couldn't even understand what they were saying, and they couldn't understand me. But luckily, I could speak Czech, so I was able to communicate with them in Czech, and it was close enough to Polish that I was able to find my way back to Auschwitz, which is where I was supposed to be going, and I got lost. So anyway, that's another story. But in terms of like being in a foreign place and the language barriers that you run into, I say to people is, as long as you have the mindset of being a foreigner and you're going there enjoying being a foreigner, then you can turn it into an adventure, and you can turn it into something sort of fun. So enjoying not understanding and not needing to be understood can make it exciting as well. I have a funny story sitting around a lunch table with a bunch of Hungarians, and I was working with them, and they were all speaking in Hungarian, in Magyarul, or Magyar language, and they kept saying, and the Hungarians, they had a funny sense of humor, and they have a funny language, and they were like, Tyler, and then the other one would be like, Tyler, and they kept saying my name in Hungarian. In the middle of the conversation, they would just drop my name because they knew that I had no idea what they were talking about, but I would recognize my name. And they were playing this joke on me, and it was, luckily they were my friends, and luckily I have a flexible sense of humor that I picked up on what they were doing. I was like, what the hell are you? I was like looking at them, I was giving them a look like, what are you saying about me? What are you saying about me? And they were laughing, and they had no idea what they were saying. But I remained friends with those guys, and one of them lives in Vancouver, and I had a chance that he moved, like a bunch of those guys, because these were film guys, and they came over to Vancouver, and so I happened to run into them a few years ago, like 2 years ago. I ran into my friend Mark, and I was like, saw him at a restaurant of all places. I'm like, Mark, what are you doing here, man? And he's like, Tyler. And I was like having a beer with him, and I was like, Mark, do you remember that time we were sitting around with you and Pal and those other Hungarian guys, and you guys were saying my name? He's like, yeah, we weren't saying anything. We were just talking about the weather or something, but we would just put your name in there so you would get pissed off at us. Yeah. So just to close that question off, it's just like when you go abroad, having a sense of adventure and just sort of throwing yourself in embracing discomfort is, as long as you have the mindset for it and you understand that you are in a foreign world, enjoy the fact that you're not going to understand it. Don't expect to understand it, and you're going to be fine. You're not going to have the anxiety attacks because you already know it. And then remember that people do speak English out there. Like, there's a lot of English spoken. So those are two different approaches to the language barrier. You can either make sure you're set up, or go travel with somebody that is either familiar with it or knows the area, or just go into it with a sense of awe, and you'll come out on the other side, or at least make sure you have a plane ticket back. So Zach, I think I'm going to turn it over to you a bit, because you were asking a little bit earlier about me teaching English.
Yeah, I think I remember you telling me you taught English in Prague just as, in between jobs or whatever. How did you find it? Was it difficult to teach English without a certificate, like, a TEFL certificate?
Yes, it was hard, but the hardest part about it was that I didn't know how to teach English. Mm-hmm. I think the hard part wasn't getting the job. At least at this time in Prague, native English speakers were highly desired and highly esteemed. And if you were a native English speaker and you applied for a job, you said, "Hey, I'm an English speaker." A lot of times, these agencies and these organizations or companies, they just wanted their employees or their students to be exposed to a native English speaker rather than having a Czech or a German teaching them how to speak English. So in the sense of like being able to land a job, it wasn't too hard, but being able to, knowing how to be a great English teacher is it is a job. And so I think you should get a certificate if you're going to take it seriously. But I got started, and this is a great story for another time, but my first week in Prague, I didn't even know anything about Prague. I landed in the most communist industrial section of Prague. I didn't know anything about what the city looked like. I didn't know it was one of those beautiful cities in the world. And I ended up going out with one of the guys in the hostel named Kenny, this Scottish guy, and we went across, and he showed me Prague. I was like, oh my God, I almost left this city without seeing this. And I got a chance to see the castle and Old Town Square and all that. But along the way, he started telling me how he had done it, and he did it without a certificate. He went to South Korea and just was traveling, and he started just teaching English as a foreign language, like conversationally. So I got excited about that, and I was getting excited about staying in Prague. So I went through a phone book, and I started calling all these agencies, and I found anything that said agencia, and I called them, thinking that these are English teaching agencies, like student agencies, English agencies. And sometimes I would call like an escort agency. I'd be like, "Yeah, do you need an English teacher?" And they'd be like, "No, we are escort agency, but maybe we do need teacher." It's like, so there was all kinds of weird like little things like that happened because I was so I just wanted to stay in Prague, and I wanted to stay in Europe. And I remember going to this hotel. I still remember what the hotel was, and I asked them for a phone book, and I just went through the phone book, and I just found every single thing that said agency, and I called them on a payphone, because this was back before I had a cell phone over there. I called them on a payphone. I was just dropping in these Corona. I was dropping in their quarters and calling until I started to build up clients. And I was still sleeping on somebody's floor. It was not easy, and I would not recommend it unless you have that kind of willing to do it. So I ended up with a few clients, and I would have to get on trams and buses and go all around the city and make crap money. It was not great money.
This is when you were teaching.
Yeah, this was my first started really surviving in Europe without any sort of support. I think my parents helped me out a little bit during that time, but mostly I was living off of my savings and whatever money I could make.
And so, but how was that set up as far as your English lessons? Were they at a school, or were they with students that you?
Not any schools, because the schools were harder. The schools you needed that TEFL, and it was a challenge for me. So I found these random people. There's a company there called the Student Agency, and they're a travel agency for students. And I happened to call them thinking they were a teaching agency. They had nothing to do with teaching, but the person on the other end said, "Yeah, well, actually, we do need an English teacher to work with our employees. So once a week, I would come in and sit with them and do a lesson for like an hour, and it would be like conversational English, and they would give them a chance to practice English amazingly enough, it was all women, and it was all Czech women, all these beautiful Czech women, and I got to teach them.
I'm sure you hated that.
Oh, I hated it. When I got my first film job, I had to leave it. And I was like, man, I hate to leave this job. But I had this buddy named John, and John was in love with the Czech girls. And so I said, I'll give this job to John. And like, he was so happy. He was like, oh man, these girls, they look at me and they start squeezing their breasts together when they talk to me, and they twinkle their eyes at me. And I was like, man, I knew I gave it to the right guy, you know? And, but they were amazing. I don't know how this sounds. I don't mean to sound like chauvinist or anything, but it was as a young I think I was 23 years old. It was amazing to sit there every day and feel special with all these like Czech girls like staring at me, and
and that's something you just have to go over there to experience, because oh man, it's wonderful.
It's just a great feeling, and I would say, I mean, this is a completely different conversation, but being an American and the different ways American dating relationships are versus European, it was so refreshing. Let me put it that way, because I don't know how it sounds to say, I was just like sitting with all these Czech girls and blah blah blah. I just was excited about this sort of dynamic, this feeling of being around these women that sort of I felt appreciated. I felt like it was just a different environment. One of them invited me to come stay at her cottage. They have these cottages out there, and as a weekend getaways. And she invited me, like I barely knew her, and she's like, "Why don't you just come and like stay at my family's cottage for the weekend?" And there was nothing beyond that. It was just I went and hung out with her for a weekend, and that's what I mean. That's what it was. It was just a great vibe, a great feeling, and a great experience. But in terms of like the actual teaching, I didn't know much about teaching. I would go and I would I forgot how I got a hold of the books. I think from some of my clients, they had little English teaching books, and I would take those books and like photocopy them and take lessons out of them, and then carry them to my next clients. And they were like simple lessons. They were simple lessons. Sometimes we would talk about our favorite movies. We would talk about our favorite bands. We would just practice English. And I had a chance to teach small children. I had a chance to teach these like kindergartners, and I basically taught them how to make paper airplanes. I was a substitute teacher, and they didn't want the regular teacher, because I would come in and play with them. It was just a way of the parents getting their kids out for an hour or two, and I would teach them some basic English, but they were like 5-year-old kids. They didn't understand a single thing I was saying. So I was like, I'm just going to show them how to make a paper airplane. And we just started playing. I just playing in the classroom. And so I think I might have rambled away from the topic a little bit, but that's how it started. And again, getting back to other ways of surviving. Teaching English wasn't the only thing I did. I did beer and bike tours. Like we'd do a bike tour around Prague and drink beer at different spots. I did. I was a barback. None of these jobs were very good jobs. I did illustration work. I did like my specialty is in visual arts and things like that. So I did that, and then eventually, of course, I got into movies. But there's many ways to do it. It's not many of them are going to be lucrative. But if you're young, or even if you're not young and you just want to travel, you can do it without. You can do it with the same way you do it here, but it's harder. I mean, you can find a job there, but it's going to be harder. It's going to be probably less pay, and you're going to have more challenges in terms of work permits and things like that. And that's where I want to get to that part of this discussion, and then we'll move into another question for you. Is there's another thing to think about when you do this, which is work permits and being able to be legitimate and legal while you're working abroad. In Czech Republic, I could get a business license. It's called a živnostenský list, and at the time I could get that. I'd have to leave the country. Back then, this was before they joined the Schengen conglomerate of countries. You'd leave the Czech Republic, go to Germany every 2.5 months, and then come back. And the certificate, this business license, it was hard to get. You had to go through the foreign police. It was a pain in the butt. But once you got it, you could basically hire yourself and give yourself a work permit. And it was basically like owning a business. And from there, I didn't have to worry about being hired by a Czech company, or it was a Czech company, but it was my own Czech company. So that is another thing to think about if there's any entrepreneurial sort of spirits out there, is that you can do it if you think around the box a little bit, and you be creative in the way that you think. You can find ways to do it. And it's getting harder. I think it's much, much harder than it was when I was doing it, because back then they really wanted, I think the society was really welcoming of Americans and foreigners. But then the other thing to think about is that in the more developing countries, it's going to be easier to get in and be able to do things. And it's going to be wilder and less restrictive, but it will be harder to make a living, because in these developing places, it's still the wild, wild west or wild, wild east. And but on that note, you'll have more opportunities, but you'll also have a lot of freedom, but you'll have less stability. Yeah. And then places like Canada, which I lived in, was very hard in terms of being able to get a business license and hire myself. Like, I tried that, and it was really, really hard. I really needed to get work permits to stay in Canada, and immigration is really, really hard. It doesn't matter. People always talk about immigrants coming into the United States. I don't care where you're immigrating to. It is not an easy process. I've been an immigrant in 3 or 4 countries, and not a single one of them. And I'm an American, and they say, oh, it's much easier for you as an American. It is not an easy thing. You have to, the Canadian system, you have more opportunities and you have more stability there, but it's more restrictive and it's harder because everybody wants to get there. Mm-hmm. Same thing with the UK, probably Australia, and definitely the United States. It's going to be harder to get into those countries if you're an immigrant or a foreigner, because everybody wants to be there. So wrapping up this little section, move now that you've got a certificate, you're teaching a certificate, and you're ready to go. How do you go from being in these teaching programs to getting the job to having a home and being accommodated for and living in these places?
Yeah, well, my time in Russia is different than in China slightly. I had a host family in Russia that would initially take care of, where I was living and my meals for the most part. But once the class was over, once I got the TEFL certificate, then I was able to get a job immediately. The school also had these certain accommodations. It was kind of far away from the city center, but it was also really cheap. And they were like, oh, you can live here. This is where all of the teachers live. And it was like 6 or 7 stops from the center where my school actually was. And the school was in a great place. It was right near the city center. So it was a cheap place. It wasn't in my ideal location as far as St. Petersburg, but it was very easy to live there. I eventually did find my own place. And I had, I had my own place that was more expensive, but it was in a nice area. And then the second time I went to Russia, because I kind of broke it up 2 different years. The second time I went to Russia, I had a roommate, and I arranged that beforehand. And he spoke Russian much better than I did, and he was able to help a lot with negotiating with the real estate agent, as well as like negotiating with our landlord. But that's why it was important to speak the language. And I did learn it as much as I could.
Yeah. I think we kind of earlier sort of hit this question by your host family was a really good way of understanding, how you go from the certificate to now you're getting accommodation. I guess my question always had been like, was exactly that. Did you find yourself there needing to look for an apartment? It sounds like the program helped you with that.
Yeah. And then just knowing other foreigners, that helps out a lot. That seems to be
the underlying sort of theme as well. Like at least for me, I think that's where we are similar in the sense that relying on other expats. Like for example, there was always like an expats website or a forum that you can meet those people, because one of the problems is you're in another place, and how do you find Craigslist in Chinese, and it's in Chinese? Well, I'm not going to understand that, but there are entrepreneurial spirits that go abroad and set up things for foreigners, and you'll be surprised at how many resources you can actually find.
And then as far as my time in China, that was slightly different. I had a school or a company that did set me up with, they placed any foreign teachers in a public school.
Yeah.
According to what you wanted. Usually they would try to get you, if you want to teach at a high school or middle school or private school, whatever, they would set you up with that. But then they would also set you up with they would connect you with a real estate agent.
Yeah.
And hopefully one that spoke English well enough.
Right.
And then you could look for, they would show you all kinds of apartments. And
amazing. So you
try
gotta
to have
choose.
it near your school.
Yeah.
You know, things like that. And so that was also very helpful as well. And then, you know, if you wanted to, that was my first year, but then the next year after I kind of got to know how to manage a lot of things, how to sign contracts with schools, then it was like I was more on my own, but I also knew a lot more.
Yeah,
I knew what to look for in
do,
apartments. I need to what to look for as far as jobs,
Right.
things like that. So I think the biggest thing, going back to what helps out a lot and softens the landing, so to speak, is expat communities are huge, especially in China.
Yeah, anybody out there listening, I think that's sort of a point I think we're trying to drive home here, is that it's not as scary as it seems, because there are so many there, especially if you go to the bigger cities, there's communities of English speakers that are supporting each other. It's not as scary and isolated as you might think it is. So let's get to another question about being an English teacher, because as I understand, in some countries being an English teacher is treated in a high esteem. For example, in Saudi Arabia, I've heard that they're very highly valued. English, they get treated really well. They get paid really well if they're especially native English speaker. So, how are you treated as an English teacher in these countries that you were in?
Well, with a lot of respect. In Russia, as someone who is a native English speaker, you can get hired like right away. And especially if you have a TOEFL certificate, all you really need to have to teach English in Russia, and it's probably still true these days. That was in 2006, is, you know, a TOEFL certificate and be a native English speaker. And then as far as China, as far as like what you needed to have to be able to teach there, same thing basically.
So but the education system itself is highly valued, I think, as well. It's not just that you're an English speaker. You were talking about this earlier to me, that you felt more appreciated as a teacher, not even just an English teacher, but just being an educator abroad than you do in the United States. Yeah,
like these little kids, like in elementary school, they would always like throw up their hand in this gesture, like, and then they would say Lao Shi. Lao Shi means teacher. They would say Lao Shi and throw up their hand like this as a sign of respect to you.
Wow.
And you know, they would always say, you know, Lao Shi. I just keep hearing. I hear their voices right now. So, you know, and it's always in such a respectful way. You know, just saying teacher, Zach. You know,
I know that in Finland, when people are kids, they want to be teachers. Like, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's not like I want to be a doctor. They want to be teachers. Like, teachers are they're paid super well in Finland. They're highly regarded. Education in general is highly regarded, and it shows. I think that's an interesting point, because my mom was also a teacher, and I see how she was a teacher here in the United States, and I see how the public school systems here, they don't really, the amount of work that it takes to be a teacher and the amount of what teachers hold in their hands is huge, because you're holding the lever that sends a kid off to the rest of their lives.
Yeah, and yeah, it's just different. It's a bit different here. I think that they see the teacher as such an important part of the community and such a respected profession. You know, they realize, well, they value education so much.
Yeah.
In China, you know, it's like maybe some would even say too much, but they definitely value it.
They highly,
and they you know, they take it seriously.
Right.
How well you do in school leads to, you know, what kind of jobs you're going to get. Yeah. And I think that's really good, because it is true in a lot of ways. however you feel about education, it is true. Like being able to work with other people, being able to be liked by your teachers, that leads to having a good relationship with your employer later on in life.
Right.
So
it teaches you valuable lessons beyond the curriculum.
Yeah, and how to get along with people and how to communicate and all that kind of stuff. So, short answer, they definitely valued teachers and respected teachers. I feel more than the United States.
It's just an amazing counterpoint to being a teacher in the United States, is that you even feel like more respected abroad than you do here. And I think that's sad, but it's also anybody out there that is questioning these kind of things, maybe that's an incentive to pursue them. And it's just sad that you have to do it there, but maybe you could bring it back here as well and change the way it is in the United States, bringing back the flame, so to speak. But I'm just going to respond to that as well, without talking about teaching, but more about being an American abroad and how noticing the change happening in Prague. When I first arrived, the view of Americans was still rather novel. It was a novelty to be an American, or at least an English speaker. It wasn't that recent from the fall of the Soviet Union, but I know soon after the fall of the Soviet Union, it was an amazing thing to be an American over there. Like, so when the first McDonald's was established in Prague, people were lined up to go to the McDonald's because they associated it with the United States, which they associated with freedom, which they associated with the counterpoint to what they had experienced. But by the time they joined the EU in the early 2000s, I noticed that some of this change had happened. Like, I had a Czech girlfriend and she was excited about having an American boyfriend, but then by the time we broke up, she was like, my mom was right, we are culturally different. And she didn't see it in the same sort of with the same sort of rose-tinted glasses that she had when we first met. And then by the time I left, the Czechs had leveled up so much. They went from being this sort of developing sort of post-communist country, and the guys themselves, like back then, they weren't really well kept up. They had been demoralized, I think. But by the time I left, like they were competition. You know what I mean? They weren't competition when I first arrived. You were special as an American, but by the time I left, we weren't special anymore. And so I think that's a changing perspective of Americans as well. So I think we're headed towards the end here, but one last question before we end on something I think we're going to do, which is playing with languages a little bit in every episode, is I want to ask you about getting around in a foreign country. Do you have any funny anecdotes or insights to head us towards the ending on what is it like to get around in a foreign country where you don't know where in the world anything is or how to get anywhere?
Yeah, it's difficult, more so in China than in Russia. In Russia, I could speak the language, or I could read the language, so it was easier in Russia. But at the same time, it's kind of easier in general than in America, because you could step outside. You come out of the metro station and you see all these guys on these bikes, these Chinese guys on these bikes, like looking at you and going, "Hello." And that's all the English that they knew. And they were trying to get your attention they can see that you're a foreigner, and like, "Hello." And then they want you to get on their bike and you'll pay them to take you somewhere. And which, of course, that's also difficult if you don't speak Chinese, because you have to show them on,
tell them where to go.
you have to show them on your phone. But then sometimes they still don't understand that. And like, and then you also take the whole plunge, like getting on this guy's bike, and traffic in China is pretty crazy. They drive very differently. Like a Chinese, you'll be on the back of his bike and you'll be going down a one-way street the wrong direction, and you're just like, oh my god. And the way they drive is like really fast, like through cars, and just like there's like dogs like running around. There's like people like just outside, just it's chaotic. I go back to that a lot with China, but at the same time, it's kind of exhilarating. My friend and I, we were at the beach on one spring break, and there was so much traffic because the beach is way far off from, like, you have to go through these mountains, these hills to get to the beach. There's huge traffic jam. This is China, okay? There's a billion people in China. Yeah. Traffic jams there are serious business. So we decided to find a guy on a bike. So both of us were on the back of his bike. We're two fairly big American guys, and we're both on this motorcycle going the wrong direction down like there's traffic everywhere. We're just on the side of the road, and then there's a railing, and then over that is like a cliff where you could and we're just speeding through. Right. We're where we want to go much faster than
Yeah.
being in that traffic. So I guess my point is that there's so many options for getting from one place to another. You can get on a motorbike, some random guy you don't know. You can get on the subway. You can get a DD. It's like their version of Uber.
Right.
It's just
So you don't have to
easy.
have a car. That's a good point. You don't even have to have a car in a lot of places.
not at all.
If you're an American, you're so used to everybody having a car. And I think that I do notice that outside of the United States, almost every country I've ever been, the driving and the sense of traffic hygiene is so much more reckless than in the United States. I'm not saying they don't have any rules, but I've noticed almost everywhere I've been, they are tremendously more reckless in terms of like what they do. I can drive over here. I can drive up on the sidewalk and turn around and go backwards down here.
definitely.
Like so many experiences. In Atlas Mountains in Morocco, I was on a bus and I was on this like highway going around this mountain. Like you look down and you see a valley down there. If the bus turns over, you're gonna roll down that hill and be dead. And it would be like a one-way road, and there would be another bus coming from the other direction. You could look down, you couldn't even see the road. All you saw was the valley down in the bottom, and you can't even see this edge of the road. And you're like, there comes another bus coming the other way. How are we gonna do this?
Let me ask you really quickly. Do you know what a Chiang Mai tattoo is?
No, but I'm looking forward to finding out what it is.
So a Chiang Mai tattoo that's a city in the north of Thailand. A Chiang Mai tattoo is when foreigners are riding on their motorbikes and they fall off because of rocks and they get their arm all scraped up and it leaves a.
So it's not a real tattoo. It's a tattoo of a rock.
Yeah,
hitting your
because it
arm.
happens
It's
so much. Because
wow. Well, yeah. I mean, that's a great nuance.
I mean,
yeah.
but it's still you just got to be careful.
Yeah, you gotta be careful. But we're headed towards the end here. This was a fun conversation. I think it would be fun to do more similar ones about the same kind of subject matter. But I think we should sort of head towards the end. I have one last thing about like using public transportation as a foreigner, getting on the trams in the Czech Republic. At least at the time they didn't have a automatic system. You had to just punch your ticket when you got in, and the bus drivers and tram drivers didn't really care. But they would have these security guys that would every once in a while they would stop you and ask you to see your permit, and if you didn't have a permit, they would penalize you and give you a fine. And a lot of times when I was over there, I wouldn't buy a ticket because it was a pain in the butt to get a ticket because we couldn't get off the phone or something like that. You had to go to a little shop and buy a ticket or whatever. And I remember I used to get on there and they would stop by and they'd say like, let me see your ticket. And I would just pretend that I didn't understand them. And sometimes it would work. Sometimes they would let me go because I'd be like, I don't speak Czech. I don't know what you're saying. And then one time, because I know a little bit of a bunch of different languages, the guy kept saying English, and I said "Nuk ep kuptoi svartua," which is Albanian, and he's like "Tedesco," like German, and I was like, then I would say something, and I would say "Mina mana sua," I would just speak another language until finally he was like, this guy, I don't know what language this guy speaks, but screw it, and he would go on. So there is some benefits to being a foreigner. So that was a fun episode, and I think we went over, but it was really fun, and I hope that we were able to give you guys out there some insights into how to live abroad, how you can make a living, how you can actually thrive and survive. Two different approaches, one very structured and another being kind of like fly by the seat of your pants. And I think we're going to do something that's kind of fun because I think Zach and I both love languages, and we want to bring you guys some fun things about languages, and we're going to do tongue twisters at the end of each episode. At least that's what we're aiming to do. So I'm going to start this little ritual with a tongue twister from the Czech Republic, which is a very famous one. I think everybody that has lived there knows this one, but people that don't know it are probably going to find it pretty intriguing because of the way it's structured. And the tongue twister I'm going to start this off with is "Strš prst skrz krk." Do you know what that means?
it sounds like you're just like stuttering or something.
That's what's great about language games is that as a foreigner, it sounds so different than what it would sound like if you were a native speaker.
Mean?
So, "Strš prst skrz krk" means stick your finger in your throat. But the reason why it's considered a tongue game or a tongue twister is because it doesn't have any vowels in it. There's zero vowels, and so as opposed to like an Italian tongue twister, which in another episode I'll give you some Italian ones. It's very verbal and very rolls, and it's a funny and the Czechs have a lot of words that don't have any vowels in them. A lot of Slavic languages, it feels very dyslexic when you read them. Like dverge. Dverge is like door. Dverge is DV. It's not like a D, a vowel, and then a V. It's dv, dv. And so they have a lot of interesting combinations of consonant sounds. Probably because it's too cold to like say a vowel, you know. And they have other sounds that we don't have, like rja, rja, and j, nya, tia, dia. They have little variations of our language, and so that's a great combination of those distinctions in the language. No vowels, and then letters and sounds that you're not familiar with. It's really fun to read Czech because some of the words are just like any Slavic language. You look at it and it's like this long, crazy word. But once you understand each section of the word, it makes sense what they mean. Like knihkupectví, I think, is a bookstore, and kniha is a book. And then you sort of combine the things and you put them together, and it starts to make sense to you. So that was a little bit of fun education there about the Czech language, and I think we're going to keep doing those every episode. We'll talk about Russian.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is that good?
We'll just make stuff up. Yeah. There's some good ones in Polish. I love any kind of language stuff. So if there's anybody out there listening that wants to contribute a tongue twister from their own language, that would be fun to try to read your tongue twister. So I think that's it for this episode. That was a lot of fun. Thanks, Zach.
All right. Ciao.
See you guys in the next one. Thanks for joining us.
Traveling changes a man you know. For better or worse, who could say? But when I died, don't you tell them I went out this way. Tell them I said something. Yeah, tell them I said something great.